Please welcome Alexandra Fuller, Hanna Rosin, Ayelet Waldman, and our moderator, Lucie Arnaz.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for choosing to come to the London Room and hear this talk. I'm very excited to be with these beautiful ladies. And before we go anywhere, this is a talk on marriage, relationships, mostly for better or for worse, it's called. So it's the whole thing. And I thought I would start it off by reading a Stephen Sondheim lyric.
Oh, great. Perfect.
Because, I need accompaniment, and Tom Lauderdale's not here this year.
Come on. No, Lucie.
No, I can't sing it. I won't sing it, but because the words are what really matter. And this is Sondheim's lyric, which I think is to a T what we think when, yes, we're going to get married, and it's going to be like this. Marry me a little, love me just enough, cry but not too often, play but not too rough. Keep a tender distance so we'll both be free. That's the way it ought to be. I'm ready. Marry me a little. Do it with a will. Make a few demands I'm able to fulfill. Want me more than others, not exclusively. That's the way it ought to be. I'm ready. I'm ready now. You can be my best friend. I can be your right arm. We'll go through a fight or two. No harm. No harm. We'll look not too deep. We'll go not too far. We won't have to give up a thing. We'll stay who we are. Marry me a little, body, heart, and soul. Passionate as hell, but always in control. Want me first and foremost. Keep me company. That's the way it ought to be. Oh, how gently we'll talk. Oh, how softly we'll tread. All the stings, the ugly things, we'll keep unsaid. We'll build a cocoon of love and respect. You promise whatever you like. I'll never collect.
Yeah, not so much my marriage.
And that's the way it'll be,
Now,
right?
is that more or less realistic than your average marriage vows?
Well, it's just so amazing. The show is called Marry Me a Little, and it was about just that, not unlike Company. You know, Stephen Sondheim is not the most optimistic person when it comes to love, and he looks at it through glasses that have, seen the days. So we're going to talk about marriage and what it is and what it isn't and what we'd like it to be. And all of our authors have written about marriage in one form or another. Alexandra Fuller, at the end, as you know, is the author of Leaving Before the Rains Come, among others. Hanna Rosin is the author of The End of Men and the Rise of Women. And Ayelet Waldman, author of A Really Good Day, and a fantastic article I read in the New York Times that you wrote, which the title I'm forgetting.
I think they titled it Truly, Madly, Guiltily. It is an article in which I said I love my husband more than my children.
Yes. And was that a sacrilege? You should get it online. Get it online. Look it up. New York Times, fabulous article. So, what is marriage, really? It's not supposed to be unfettered joy, as one of you said in your books. Who wants to take it on? I think that might have been you, Hanna.
Unfettered joy?
Not supposed to be unfettered joy.
Did I say that?
Well, I think you might have quoted somebody
My
saying
marriage
that.
is unfettered joy.
Is it?
No, it's funny. Yesterday, my husband and we got into an argument, as one does with another couple. Do you guys know the Love Languages book? I have to say it's the one self-help book that sticks. I haven't read it at all, but I know what the love languages are, that everybody has a way. So for some people, it's words of affirmation, acts of service, quality time, and there's a fourth one I can't remember. And so, for example, your husband comes home and he cleans, he does all the things. He calls the plumber and fixes this, and he say see how much I love you. But I could give a shit about acts of service, so he's doing it. He's not speaking my language, and his is words of affirmation, which is just sort of generally giving compliments, which I am the worst person in the world at generally giving or receiving compliments. So it's just a missed communication.
That's true. Do you find it's easier for one of you guys to say "I love you" than the other? In your marriage, is it a thing where you're always saying it, or it's easier for one person? I find my husband tells me he loves me so often, and I think, ooh, and I hate to say it back just because he said it. That's not the same. I love you too. That's not the same. You have to think about it. Like sometimes he'll be shaving or doing something in the kitchen, and I just want to go, I love you, and I don't. I think, that's silly. but he'll do it to me for no reason at all.
Yes,
and I love
well,
that.
that's because it's meaningful to him, and you are not a words of affirmation person.
I'm a
See,
bitch.
this is a very useful theory.
It's good, and you don't even have to read the book.
Very-
You just have to listen to
I've
Hannah
never
for
read
5
the book.
minutes.
I've never read the book, but I find this theory, like you're speaking across each other. It's kind of a sad.
Well, we're trying to figure out what marriage really is, not necessarily the unfettered joy people might think it is, or the marry me a little lyric. So I think it's changed through the decades. You know, don't you think? What if you look back, what we thought marriage was supposed to be for women and for men? I mean, what did you think when you were?
Well, I mean,
up?
I performed what I wanted to do was the absolute opposite of my childhood, just so that my kids had a chance of surviving beyond the age of like 5. Although if you talk to them, they're like, oh my God, no, it was touch and go. You were a terrible mother. So maybe that's just, but I think for me, it was about getting out of chaos and out of racism and out of the narrative of white supremacy, which it had been my, you know, I mean, in the States,
She lived in Africa, for those of you who don't know.
Thus the accent. So, you know, when I met this American who, he wasn't racist, he didn't appear to be sexist, that was a miracle. And he also had safe harbor. He was a river guide. So he had all this excitement, but it was like, you got paid for the excitement. It wasn't like my childhood, which was like excitement that you didn't get paid for and you were probably going to die. On a river, it's awesome. You go down a river for a day, and then you climb out, whatever, and then someone hands you a cold beer, and there's a Land Rover that actually works, and you go take. I was like, right, married, done. This is good. And I think, you know, for him, he came out of Middle America, and none of you know what the code is, and you're throwing code at each other all the time.
Yeah.
And the code he threw at me, thinking I would get it, was that he was mainline Philadelphia. And I thought, sweet, he's a heroin addict. This is a great match. And the code that he sort of looked at with me was that I was this kind of Karen Blixen person. He didn't understand I was going to spend my life deconstructing what those terrible women had done, you know, kind of gaining their freedom on the backs of black people that never gets written or talked about. And I was coming of age angry about that. So you can imagine, I mean, my God. So we had 20 years based on a complete misunderstanding.
Wow.
And I'm so stubborn. I was like, you know what? If I give this one more year, I'm going to change this man's mind. I got this. So that's partly why our marriage went on and on and on, because I'm a lecturer deep down. I'd be like, right, good morning, morning lecture. I've had my cup of tea, and this morning it's...
You've got it, and you know what you're going to do, and you're going to succeed at it. You're not going to fail.
And you know, I mean, really, I think for me, the terror of knowing that I had a very good chance of, I mean, you can't, one of the terrible things about being a writer is you pay attention and you start reading articles about yourself, and so I knew I had a good chance of being an addict and having suicidality and all these other things because I'd had so much trauma in my childhood.
Right.
And so to marry someone who came out of a suburb, I thought this is going to be cakewalk. But it wasn't, because we all manifest trauma in different ways, and he wasn't in any way equipped to deal with my drama. He tried an intervention on my mother. My mother goes, God, that's the most American thing I've ever heard of. Get me a gin.
But of course, a couple of generations before that, you wouldn't have even had the opportunity to think that way. You would have been married, and the wife, and the husband does what the husband does, and the wife pretty much sticks with it, and it was very unusual to even do what you're saying.
I was putting butter on his hamburger, and that was when I was like, oh, God. If you're melting butter on someone's hamburger and thinking, I wonder what his cholesterol is, it's time to get a divorce. Like, if you're having secret murder thoughts, it's time to
I was trying to figure out why you were putting the butter on the
I
hamburger,
thought that
weren't
was
you?
an
Like, why
American
was she
thing.
doing that? Okay. And Hannah, what about you? How do you look at your marriage as opposed to what you expected maybe as a child? Is it what you thought it would be? Is it different?
Oh my God. I am the most thoughtless for a writer. Sort of, I don't think I thought about my marriage.
Yeah.
Like in the way that now I read stories about people agonizing about having children. It's just not something I actually maybe I have like a animal spirit that way. It's just like there are things you do and I'm not dutiful in any way. It's just that.
You wanted to do it, though.
No.
No.
I didn't think
How
about
many
it.
children do you have?
3.
Me too.
which is
Yeah.
too many. One too many. They're wonderful
I have
children.
3 too. She has 4.
You have 4 children, yes.
So what are you saying? That you didn't think about it growing up? I'm going to get married and it'll be sort of like this? Or you just didn't think
I
about it?
think that the thing that I did, everybody doesn't want something that their parents had.
True.
And I think, I think that's right. I think there's, when you're trying to claim your independence, you're trying to claim some model that your parents did not have. And so I think I just wanted quiet. Like I think.
But wait. So did you have chaos too growing up?
Just sort of like indulgent, incessant, ceaseless kind of strife. It was just the vernacular.
I would call that chaos. Yes.
Yes, it was just the language of the household. It was just the
Yeah.
way it was just the way it was. So I think
Okay.
I just wanted
Yeah.
less noise.
Yeah.
Really.
I can identify with that.
Yeah. Do you
And
have
so
that where you
can
sort of
you,
went one
Ayelet,
place
right?
Well,
and then you moved to
it's
another
interesting.
place?
I mean, my parents, thank goodness they're not here, so I can just tell. My parents have been married for 54 years, and they have been unhappy for 53 years, 11 months, and 27 days. I mean like big unhappy, like big, bad.
But they stayed married.
But they stayed married. You know, my husband describes my parents as the flag of Mexico. You know, the mongoose it's the mongoose and the eagle, right? They're eating each other, like locked in mortal combat for all eternity. That's my parents. And I mean, also I come from a very, very large family and 6 kids, and my parents were kind of serial abandoners of their children. So if they decided they were going to leave Israel when my brother got drafted, the year my brother got drafted into the army. So they were like, bye, good luck with that, bye, and left this kid all by himself, and he ended up, he was a big war hero, but he was seriously wounded alone, and my sister had a psychotic break, and they were like, wow, sucks for you, and just kind of didn't, and I didn't even think about that till last year. I'm like, wait a minute. They didn't bring her home. They didn't put her in a hospital. Like, what? Anyway, so nobody was shooting at one another, unlike in your house, but it was a lot of just, it was a hard place to grow up. And I wanted a man who actually, I never, for years and for, 53 years, I thought my father was just this, he felt things so deep inside that he couldn't access them. But I don't know that that's true anymore. I mean, I don't know if maybe the real issue is there's no difference between feeling something so deeply inside you that you can't access it and not feeling it at all. It just doesn't matter.
Right.
So
people
can I
around
just
you-
say she made the most hilarious radio story about her father's therapy sessions.
Oh, God.
It is the funniest. I think about it all the time. It's so funny. Like, imagine, I'm just gonna, you can actually
go.
tell the story, but imagine you come upon a trove of tapes of your parents' therapy session. You think this is just like, God has given me this so I can understand everything.
Yeah.
And you pop in the tape, and her father
So my
was
father-
seeing an incredibly famous
Yeah.
therapist, so
One
it
of the
has
most
to be
famous
perfect.
in history.
Yeah.
And the thing about my father is he's literally I don't think he's ever said I love you. Maybe he has, but I've never have no access to his feelings. He talks about the history of the Soviet Union, Zionism.
In the therapy session.
But that's the thing. So I got the therapy tapes, and I was like, oh my God, this is it. This is it. I'm going to play this, and I'm going to have insight. And I'm going to know, and I think what I didn't even realize, I was like, I'm going to play this, and I'm going to hear that he loves me. And and then I pop in the therapy. I'm doing it with Ira Glass of This American Life, and I pop in the therapy, and it's like, and the 5th 5-year plan was very hard on the Ukrainian peasant. I'm like, what the are you serious? Really? You're paying this man to listen to talk about Stalin's 5-year plans? And yes, hour after hour after
They
hour.
never talked about anything.
Never. They never talked for a single minute. For a single minute. And we listened to all of them. And then, Ira and I, for months, were making this story, and we wanted it to be deep and profound. And there were big things in my parents' marriage. There was the spending all the money that they had on the Russian prostitute. It was a big thing when there was no money anymore because it all had gone to a Russian prostitute. Big thing, big thing, big thing. Nothing. And we were like, we wanted to go into all this depth, and I was like, we just got to go talk to your father. And I get my dad on tape, and I'm like, so, Dad, therapy, and he's just like, I'm like, why did you give it to me? Did you want me to have access to it? And he's like, oh no, I just thought, I found it, thought you might want to listen to it sometime. Anyway, it does make for, we just decided to make it into a funny little smaller piece where I thought I was going to have like some huge personal epiphany, and instead I'm just like, oh my God, that's what he is. So I married the opposite. Like, to bring it back to marriage, I married a man who's incredibly emotional and incredibly sensitive, and so emotional and so sensitive that 2 of my gay friends came up to me at my wedding and they were like, are you sure? Are you 100% sure? One of them was like, because you dated me. And I'm like, no, I know. I'm good.
Well, I think that's natural that we do that. I mean, we had a little chaos in our family, too. A little bit. A little bit. Although it looks pretty good next to all you guys.
I know, right? Actually.
I thought it was bad, but actually it's not so bad after all. But I think you do, if that's what you had, you do try to do it a little bit differently, Right. And I have girlfriends and fellas I know who grew up with the exact opposite, It worked out okay. There wasn't screaming and yelling going in the family. Barbara and Bernie, you don't scream at each other like that, no. And your kids are normal, right? My kids are all screwed up. No, but I mean, it depends on what you have. You're going to go the opposite because anyway.
I loved what Alexandra was saying about her kids, like just how that goes on to the next generation, like what they seek and,
Right, so if I was creating safety, what that really ended up being was this 20 years of solitary confinement where we did this. I felt like we were 2 little tiny weeny favored nations, had like basically favored nation treaty with each other. So you kind of have diplomatic relations and you share some sort of economic, whatever, NATO agreement. And it was very much like that. It was so I mean, I can say all of this now because I'm in relationship. But a lot of it had to do with the currency of love when I was growing up was really frowned upon, very suspicious. And my whole thought about this is, how do you teach someone to love? And what I taught my daughter was, listen, love you. I didn't even know what I was saying, for God's sake, because love meant nothing to me. Like you said, good God, my parents were British, and there was just nothing good was coming. I mean, please, they haven't had an official
do you
emotion.
Think love is a new thing? Like when people write the histories of marriage, that the history of marriage is that the marriage was not for love. That's generally how it's told, and that the love marriage is a relatively modern phenomenon. And so there are great books about this. Stephanie Kuntz's is the best one. And then you wonder, like, well, where did the love go? And what was it?
What did they do with the love when they weren't getting married?
And I think so much of the conversation became about the fact that when women get love, when you actually explore what love is, it becomes terrifying, because if you only love must start with self. But imagine you really do that. The next thing that will happen was you will start to look around and imbue other people with love, and that breaks the narrative. It's the last thing you want if you're trying to raise a racist. Is be like, love's the thing. Be like, no, fear and hate are the 2 things.
Thank you.
And, you get taught that. I mean, obviously no one articulates that. And I think I unwittingly embodied that in my marriage. It was stagnant, it was hostile, and it was Cold War. I mean, we never exchanged missiles or anything. And some of that had to do with, he negotiated by withholding. I negotiated by yelling. So it was this, you're just forever there, right? Anyway, a horse fell on him, literally. Yeah. And I didn't do it. I did not push the horse. And it was an absolutely catastrophic accident. And I've been around a ton of horse accidents. And he had 6 strokes. He was crushed by. And as this horse was just flailing on him, I thought, well, yeah, he's not coming out from that. And I fought to save his life, because when he did come round, he said, oh God, this whole thing's just such a fucking mess. And I was like, you know what? I think you should end it on a better note than that. Hang in there, you bastard. Every time he looked like he was going to die, be like, nah, do something else. Stick a stint up his throat. I don't care what you do, but that man's going to live to be a better person. But it was so, I was reading a lot of Jung at that time, which is always dangerous. I don't recommend it near your midlife. And, you know, his whole thing was anything that you repress will become manifest and you'll call it an accident. And my kids, having witnessed that, they're now 25 and 21, have come back in a very radical way and said, I don't want that lying, kind of bickering, transactional relationship that you and Dad performed. And they are much more interested in open relationships and exploring, you know, self-love. And they are, I mean, there's the whole conversation about who you're attracted to and so on. It's so much more about the human and less about the identity of the human. And I think, you know, even coming out of my tradition, even though I'm incredibly young,
You are.
but, you know, it was like I got raised under a rock in Rhodesia. It was so much racism and so much sexism. So I fit the 1950s. Like, my idea of what a woman should be was actually quite old-fashioned. Even though you can have this strong spirit, you're still like, well, there's certain things that just aren't going to happen because I'm a woman.
Right.
Including, you know, and so I performed, I think, a quite obedient wife for about 10 years. And then I was like, you know what? Fuck this shit. And that was, it was like that shocking, because I went along performing obedience, and I got an eating disorder. I did everything you're supposed to do. And then 10 years into this, I was like, I can't be thin enough. I can't bake enough fresh bread, raise enough children, be on the bloody PTO rights. There's nothing I can do that's going to make this man turn to me and go, I see you, I love you, wow, you rock.
Yeah.
And I said, fuck this shit, and I never stopped swearing after that. I identify with Calamity Jane.
Yeah. Well, you had to sort of to break out of where you were.
I know.
That was your
So that's
breaking.
why when I see her, I'm like, you know what? She's really a caring person who would rather deal with sourdough than human rights and justice, but that's not the thing. So now she's this foul-mouthed, gun-toting woman who lives in the West and has had too much sun. And my favorite Calamity Jane quote, and I want the T-shirt, says, I don't drink where I'm the only fucking one with balls. And I'm like, that's going to be my T-shirt. And I want to run for governor.
Jamie will have those made up for the
that.
next Writers' Festival. We'll have them available for the next Writers' Festival, those T-shirts. But I love the quote that you used. You just sort of said it in a different way, the Carl Jung quote about until you make the unconscious conscious, it'll direct your life and you'll call it fate.
Yes, that's exactly. Do you know that in your head?
You said it and I wrote it down because it was in your book.
Oh, I see.
It's
you
in
weren't
your
mind reading.
It
Okay.
was in your
yeah.
book.
Oh,
I
phew.
did my homework. But that's exactly what I believe, and that's where, you know, this is why we've come a long way, baby, in many, many ways. And the Dr. Phils and the Oprahs and all those wonderful, you know, opportunities to allow us to look into ourselves that people weren't doing. My folks could have possibly made it together if it was okay to have problems. It was okay to get help. You didn't do that then. I mean, that meant you were crazy and you lost your job, and it was. But I think you have to go and figure out what's underneath. What did you pick up when you were in the chaos and the screaming and the stuff at home? And what message did you take on to yourself that wasn't true?
And what duty do you have to liberate yourself?
That's right.
And in that, you know, I learned so much more about marriage by getting divorced than I did by being married. I think I should have done the other way around. I should have done the divorce for the first 3 years.
Get divorced first.
Yeah, and then being like, wow, I really know you now. Let's not get married. But I would have learned a lot about what I wanted.
I think that's why
My
people
mother
shouldn't
had
go to
a-
college
my mother
right out of
had-
high school.
My mother had a very bitter but very wise friend who used to say that before you married someone, you had to imagine being divorced from them. And if they weren't the person you could tolerate being divorced from, then you couldn't marry them because...
But you don't know that because you're in some
not that
ether.
you will get divorced from them eventually,
No, but you
like,
don't know that you don't know because you're shagging
I mean,
the guy,
we were
all the
engaged.
hormones are going.
We
you'll
were
put up
engaged
with-
in 3 weeks. So, and I was 27, and I proposed in my sleep. apparently, like when I woke up one morning, it was our third date because we only saw each other on the weekends because he was living in the country. So it was our third date. Yes, I slept over, and I woke up and he said, "Do you remember what you said last night?" And I said, "No." And he said, "In the middle of the night, you sat up in bed and you said, 'So, Michael, are you going to marry me?'" And I was like so embarrassed. I mean, I hadn't even peed in front of him yet. You know, I was just so embarrassed. And then after I sort of looked up and I said, "Well, what did you say?" And he said, "I said yes." And I was like, "Okay." And from that moment, we were, you know, that was it. We were getting married, and we told our parents, and we so didn't know each other that he followed me I had a job in San Francisco. He followed me, and then when it was a year-long federal clerkship, I was a lawyer at the time, and I was like, well, he wants to live in California. His mother's here, so I'll only look for jobs in California. And I would have gone home to New York. I mean, that's where I always assumed I would live. And he, without me realizing it, had really hoped to move back to New York, but he was like, well, I guess she really wants to be in California. And it wasn't for 5 years when we were by this point, we had moved to Berkeley, and I said, you know, I'm really glad that you insisted on us staying here in California, because I love California. And he was like, what? It was you? Wait, really? And it was this misunderstanding, because we didn't have the slightest idea who each other was when we got married, because we just, you know, it was literally love at first sight.
Do you think we're at a disadvantage for not being divorced then?
I was just going to, well, I wasn't going to say it that way, but I was going to ask.
I do find that my divorced friends, my friends who have gotten divorced sort of after 10, 15, however much years of marriage, they do have a kind of clarity and insight about life. This is the wrong way to look at divorce.
I almost hate to. I am incredibly happily married. I really, really adore my husband, and I love being married to him, and we work together. And it's not like we're conflict-free. We fight all the time. We have a big, you know, actually, we fight less because I'm in this kind of therapy now, which it turns out I wasn't a yeller. I was just fucked up. And now that I'm not, you know, I'm slightly less fucked up. I don't yell as much. Amazing.
Funny how that works.
I will say that I have a rash of friends who are getting divorced. I'm 53, and this seems to be a moment. Like the 50 is like a moment where a lot of people seem to be getting divorced. And can I say this? They are getting laid like and the guys are like in their 20s. It's insane. They're on all of these apps, and they're all having sex with 25-year-olds. And at first I thought, like, what is it? I mean, I realized, like, so like 25 to 30, all these young men, if they go out with women their own age, they want, like, a relationship. And if you're 53 and you've just got divorced, you don't want to relate, and certainly not with a 25-year-old. You're just like, oh, sure, you know? Like, so it's, you know, everyone is... Anyway, whatever. I don't know why I brought that up, but because I guess I've been thinking about it.
But you said how much you love.
I find that very.
You're talking about how much
curious.
you love your husband, and there's a good
Right.
chance.
I was talking about my husband, who looks every bit as amazing now as he did when he was 25.
Yeah, but to the detriment, sometimes someone would call you a bad mother because.
Yes, well,
because you love your husband more than your children.
You know, I wrote that article. You know, when my oldest is 23, around the same age, and yours are younger, right? My youngest is 14. So when I had my oldest, it was kind of, I think, the pinnacle of obsessive helicopter parenting. And I think we're still there, but we're maybe slightly less.
Yeah.
And there was, you know, long gone were the days of Irma Bombeck joking about, you know, the trials and tribulations of parenthood. It was all about just like everyone. I mean, I literally at the playground was pushing my daughter on a swing, and I had left, you know, I was on maternity leave, and I was so bored, and I turned to a mother next to me, and I said, oh my God, aren't you just so bored sometimes? And she said, what are you talking about? I've never been so happy in my life. I just perfected my homemade Play-Doh recipe. And so I wrote this essay as a reaction to, because all of these women I knew who were so invested in motherhood, so deeply, deeply invested, and they would say, and I'm not, they say literally about their babies, he's the love of my life. She's the love of my life. I've never loved anybody so much. And I loved my children. I do love my children, but they weren't the love of my life. Their father was the love of my life. And I noticed, not, I think, coincidentally, that the women who said those things were not having any sex at all. And we were. So...
Has something to do with it.
So I had friends who were writing this book, and they said to me, will you write an essay, because you're the only one who know, you have to write about, it was all about motherhood, and they said, you write about like getting laid, because nobody we know is doing it but you. So I wrote this essay about how these two things were connected, and that, you know, that maybe the reason that we still had sex life is because I love my husband more than my children. And then the New York Times, I didn't submit it to the New York Times, they just picked it up, and it was in the early days of the Modern Love column. So we didn't quite realize what viral was at the time. I thought I wrote a little essay for a literary anthology. How many people have you ever bought one of those? Nobody. And it turned out I wrote something that between 5 and 10 million people read on one Sunday morning. And
it's a good article.
Was
you read it,
terrifying.
Yeah.
I think your genius or I don't know, I don't remember if it was in the headline or the text, was to make it comparative. I mean, what you're trying to do is like delineate a category. Like, this is your husband.
Right.
Those are your children, which I think was
but
like
what
a
I said is, if
necessary...
you're going to say you love your children more than anybody else in the world, well, then I'm going to, like, that's, you know, like, obviously I don't love my husband more. You know, you love them differently.
Yeah.
But I said, if you're going to make a hierarchy, well, your hierarchy is messed up, and I'm going to, like, make the hierarchy back at you. And
But you made well, this is...
then I went off a little bit.
But
Yeah.
listen, I think that you're onto something, because I have now been in a successful, trusting relationship, which I can really validate what you two are saying. I just think you got into that. And you know what? The relationship I'm in is just as lucky as the one I was in. It just was just luck. I found, you know, whatever. We tripped into each other and went, you know, we use the same soap. Seems about as good a bloody reason as any to. I wanted someone who did their life for a living, and he's an artist and I'm a writer. So that, for me, was a huge criteria. There couldn't be that disconnect. But in the context, though, of my relationship with my ex, there was the trust that didn't exist there, that, you know what, I'm going to hold sacred space for you so you can grow and develop and understand yourself. And then I'll be the stable one for a bit, and you go crazy and grow up, and that ball goes back and forth. That never happened. And as a result of that, both of us displaced emotion on our children. And that is what you're hitting on, is don't do that. That is gross and yucky, and it's bad for the kids. Right. It's a terrible burden to give them. And I have that kind of, I don't know what it's like having me as a mother. I would be exhausted, and I had my mother as a mother. So, but, you know, I'm constantly sort of, what I've done to everyone, I also do with my children, and it's ended up having these fantastic conversations with my, you know, my 25-year-old said, yeah, it felt emotionally incestuous that I was friends to both you and Dad, and they were our skiing partners, and we rode with them, and you know, I had this unnaturally, you know, I hear mothers say that, oh, we're like sisters, and my flesh creeps now. Because having done the work of divorce, I also had to do the work of growing up into the kind of mother who says, you know what, I'm it. If I have a partner, I will love and reflect that in a grown-up adult way. And these guys are my people I protect. And their job is not to love me or affirm me or do anything. For me, it's to shine, you know, love on them.
Yeah.
But if they don't love in return, so what?
That's right.
I mean, that's exactly. I mean,
that's exactly the way it should be.
And your partner, you're insisting on that. Like, hey, no, it's not okay that you drop the love thing. I need that so I can grow and be. And
yes.
And I think that's
we're not just protecting and each other.
So I'm glad I'm here to be like, you know what? As the group fuck up, I can say, well
You're
done.
Not
and that's
the group.
But you know, you go through the brokenness of it,
Yeah.
and then when you fix something, it'll never be unbroken the way yours is. But in the mosaic
so
of
well
that,
put.
I learned
That's
how
so
to
well
put a
put,
relationship
Alexandra.
together. And I had to learn relationship, by the way, because whatever my parents had was just some fabulous,
that's right. We don't know what it is.
Glamorous, crazy. I mean, God
we don't know
knows
what we're looking
that
for.
was.
That's right. We don't know.
Hanna, are your parents still together? I'm sorry.
That's
I'm like
okay.
asking. I'm like so
I'm just going
curious.
to tear this up because you guys are
like
talking way better
dipping
than
in-
I could
like,
ever
is
imagine
your-
in my life.
Are
Well,
your
I
parents
was
still
thinking
together?
about one thing I think about is the kind of, you know, my father recently died, and I just made a radio story about it, which hasn't aired, but I played it. But we have to audition these radio stories. It will air in a couple of months.
Yeah.
And my parents did nothing but incessantly fight, and all anyone hears from my mother talking about my father is like, holy shit, did they love each other? And then I realized, seeing it from everybody else's eyes, having made this story, that I missed something in the characterizing my parents. I missed something. There was something I didn't see about how connected they were because I was just sort of in my own story about me and what my parents did to me and blah, blah, you know. So there's some sort of like thing that you just can't see. And I think as a parent in your marriage, I think about that too. Like I constantly like what thing will my children say about me and therapy? And I wish I could walk into that room and say like, well, what a pain in the ass you were. It's not just my fault. That do you remember what you were like when you were a teenager? So I think there's also a little bit of sort of, you know, being stuck between the two generations.
But I'm really encouraging our children to go and get somebody to talk to. Please, blame me. I don't care. Get it all up. Vomit it out. You've got to. You have to. I was just doing the best I could, and I was all bandaged up when I came to you, you know. I was just doing the best I could. And that's the only way you can survive is to do that. I'm curious about one thing. You wrote something in your book about the rise of women, the fall of men, the rise of women, about Korean mothers. Do you remember? You did a little thing about talking about because they're talking about how men have changed and women are taking on,
they're
you
in the
know.
worst position of any mothers I've ever come across. I feel so much stress when you just say the word Korean mothers because it's just this thing where like, you know, everything has changed. Like the patriarchal society is broken down. Korean women go to college. They can now hold certain jobs. There's been just a sort of massive rise in kind of what women can do in Korea. But the cultural norms of femininity have changed exactly zero. So it's like you are allowed to do all these things in the like we think, oh, work-life balance, you know, all the conversations we have here. It is nothing compared to what Korean mothers have to deal with. So they're dealing with a completely patriarchal work structure, which requires you to go drinking and like work like 14 hours a day. I'm not even exaggerating.
Yeah, you have to work all day long and then go drinking with your
simultaneously
boss. You
expectations for children, which like
job.
you have to have tutors. You're not allowed to have babysitters.
Right.
I don't know how the hell
Right.
they do it. Babysitters are just taboo in that society.
It's
so it's
unbelievable.
like you got to whisper for your neighbor to take care of the kid and your friend to come in and make these arrangements. It's like
But also
impossible.
what they're doing for their sons because they realize that the marketplace has to open up and that men have to become more feminine in order to survive.
It is
and they're
hard going,
teaching
like-
them, you know, giving them softer toys and coloring, doing things that you usually give to your daughters to do. And
Yeah.
then women have to be like that over there, which is incredible. It's funny that we're talking about a lot more motherhood than actually just the marriage thing. But
Well, that's why I got married, just for the babies.
well, kind of. I think a lot of us do. I think a lot of kids in my generation just thought about having a family, and they don't think so much about the marriage. You think about the wedding. I mean, I know that was my first mistake. My first time, I was very young, and I just kept picturing the wedding, and I made all the plans at 20. You know, it's 20. First time I got married to a guy who I'd only known for 5 years. It was the only person I ever dated or I ever slept with anybody. Right? I married him because I didn't want to break up with him. It would hurt his feelings. Oh, God. So I married him, and a year later, I was like, what did I do? I made a big, huge, but now I've been married 37 years, so it's a different thing entirely. But
And right, so they're both, you know, maybe we have like made this tragic mistake by getting, but because it is luck, you luck into the person. I mean, I went through a period in my life where I felt like Michael and I were beshert, which is this word in Hebrew that means like you're intended, like it was a miracle, you know, like, and the story is that before the baby is born, the God whispers into the baby's ear the story of their life and tells them, and then pokes them on right under their nose, and that's where you get your the divot between your nose, and they forget everything. But then if you meet the person who God has whispered to you about, it rings a bell, and you think you remember them and you recognize them. And I never believed the story, but I loved that story, and that was the story we told about the first time we met, because I really did see him standing in my apartment on the Lower East Side in between two panes of bulletproof glass, and I thought, oh, there's a guy I'm going to marry. And But I think it's just dumb luck, and it just happened to be that guy, it could have been anyone between those two panes of bulletproof glass.
And I also, I mean, the way that my children are approaching even their identity has been so profoundly liberating. And it's made me realize how narrow even the structure of like marriage is, and the whole narrative around, you know, gender and sexuality and spirituality. It's just so much more robust than us sort of being like, it's sort of that thing where you go, okay, check off the box, the kids kind of come, whatever, or the kids come next, and then you do that thing I did, which was fall so in love with the kid.
Yeah.
That was my primary thing, and I could withstand the vehicle of this lousy marriage. And the thing that we haven't talked about is what it does to men. To be in these lousy marriages, which I consider, I mean, that's part of my profound sorrow as my husband lay dying was, God, I've been such a shit wife. I really didn't like you. I put butter on your hamburger when I heard you had high cholesterol. And now you're going to, like, I had those whole...
What happened? You have to tell us the end of that story.
He lived. He's fine. He climbed to the base of Mount Everest the next week or month or something like that. Very soon, he was just completely fine. And he learned not one thing, I don't think, from the whole experience. But I learned a lot. And I think it was really just this, you know, we didn't perform the really, like for me, the relationship I'm in now, the thing that I am so grateful for is I get to perform the most radically liberated version of myself, and that's safe. And I can keep trying to express what that is. And my kids are doing that, front-loading it. They don't even need the safety of a relationship, whereas I think I'm still insecure. And that's why, you know, people talk about open relationships. I'm like, look, honey, given everything, any sex anyone is having in my house is just luck. This is just...
But don't the kids, so I think about the kids, you know, the kids, I'm saying broadly the kids, not my kids. It feels... they feel untethered, and it doesn't always feel liberated. Sometimes it just feels lost, and sometimes it feels lonely. The way that they are, the way that their singular unit is kind of self-understanding. Like, it doesn't always feel quite right to me.
But Danzy Senna, who I went to see before this, who's so brilliant, by the way, her talk blew me away because so much of it was also about this, says there is that experience of finding yourself and growing up as being alone on the raft in the middle of the sea, having courted eviction from your whole tribe, which is the sort of process of individualization. And there is this theory that some people are supposed to stay in the village and some people are supposed to leave the village. But, you know, and I think your children sort of choose. So I think if your kid tries to fake the thing they're not, because my oldest daughter's done all of this. She came out as gay and bi and this and that, and the next thing I was just waiting for her to be trans. It was the whole thing. And then she is I mean, she dresses like a 60-year-old woman. She likes to embroider, and she has the way more conservative relationships than I do. But her sense of self is so much more...
Then you did a really good job.
Yeah.
Then we should all be very proud if our kids can find themselves through all of the muck we put them through in the process of trying to find ourselves while we were still trying to do a marriage. And I think that's probably what, for better or for worse, is supposed to mean. We don't know what we're saying when we take those vows. We really have no clue what the problems are that are going to come up. And for better or for worse, it's in a house. Oh, I can't wait to get to the party. You know, I mean, we have no clue. And yet, are you supposed to stay in a marriage that is going nowhere and two people are miserable? No. So it's not always till death do you part. It's not always.
No, and I think the rhetoric of that really protects an institution in a very dangerous way. And that the shakedown of what you do at home reflects, you know, abusive relationships in workplaces and an abusive political system that we're now, I mean, as a nation, I think we're behaving as if we're in an abusive marriage, refusing to see each other and we're making each other invisible. And
that's a good metaphor.
I definitely feel, as a citizen of this current administration, like I feel like a battered wife.
Yeah.
I mean, every morning I'm just like, is he going to hit me again today? Or which of the children is going to get smacked around today?
Yeah.
Well, the answer is yes, and all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I do.
So
and
we
I-
need to get divorced from this guy.
Yes, divorce.
Well, but
Let's divorce this guy.
But I think also, I mean, I think the thing about that is it's not him we need to divorce ourselves from. We need to fall back in love with each other as a nation.
There you go.
And that
Best
is
thing
hard
said
to
all
do.
day.
That is hard to do.
That and what
like
you
I
just said is the
profoundly
best
love
metaphor.
you. You know.
Yes.
For
If you love yourself, and that's what it
Yeah.
always comes down to, isn't it?
Yeah.
You have to find a way to love yourself, which is what we talked about from all the things we went through
Yeah.
as kids. And then if you can turn around and only just begin to love your partner that you swore you were going to, be with forever, or God forbid, a whole nation you're supposed to care about. And it's a hard job. This is the easiest job I've ever had, talking to the three of
great.
you.
Thank you so
I
much.
really
Thank you
appreciate
so
it. Now
much,
we're almost
Lucie.
out of time, so we really don't have time for too many questions. But you're incredibly smart, brilliant women. Okay, one question, 16 seconds.
I loved your piece.
Oh,
She
thank
loved
you.
the article.
Are you still getting hate mail?
Are you still getting hate
The
mail?
culture changed.
Yes, the culture.
The
has
culture
shifted.
changed, and
Totally.
at some point there was this massive switch, and all these people started saying, "Oh my God, you're totally right." I knew that things were. It was interesting because right
have to
away I
quit.
was on like Mormon radio, and they were like, "You're totally right. We're not going to pay any attention to any of that stuff you say about gay rights, but you're totally right about."
Were you really? That's
Yeah.
so funny.
But the culture really has changed in that way. So it's funny because I do see there was an article recently where a woman said, I hate my child and wish I'd never been a mother. And my reaction was, is she crazy? And they're like, wait, roll it back, lady.
All right, we got to go. Thank you very
Thank
much
you,
for coming.
guys.
And thank you, ladies. It was a wonderful interview.